Welcome to Game of the Week. I'm Coach Bryant, and you know what time it is. Let's jump into it. Today's Game of the Week is going to focus on a well-known chess master from history by the name of Paul Morphy, and he's going to be playing another beginner in today's game named Dr. Carr. Now, all of us have known a doctor in our lifetime because we've either been sick or someone we know has needed to go to the doctor, and we think they're pretty smart guys. They know what they're doing. Doesn't mean they're a great chess player, as we're about to find out. In today's goal, we are going to be looking at a game played between these two players in 1858. And to make it harder for the master, Paul Morphy agreed to wear a blindfold during this entire game. Now, I'm not saying that by the end of the game, you will be able to play with the blindfold, but there are some key things that we're going to talk about. And the main theme that we're going to take away from this game is that to have a great ending, we have to start with the good beginning. Let's jump into how the game began. King's Pawn. To properly start a chess game, we go by the opening principles. Number one, we obviously need to control the center of the board, also called the hill. And the reason we want to control the center is if you think of a giant hill, instead of thinking the board as being flat, but there's a giant mountain and its peak is in the center of the board, it's much easier to run down a hill than to run up a hill or to climb that mountain. So from the beginning of the game, rule number one, open with a center pawn. And Paul Morphy is quite well known for playing the king's pawn. Other players like to play with the queen's pawn. Both moves are totally fine, and the goal is very simple. We want to take control of the center of the board. In our game today, Paul Morphy plays with the king's pawn. So principle number one is going to be open with a center pawn. After this, principle number two, develop your pieces into the game as quickly as possible from the back rank. This is what I like to call the bench. Any team sport has the players waiting on the bench to join the game, and that's just how the pieces start the match. Paul Morphy's pieces are on the back rank, just like Black's pieces are on the back rank. And it's really going to be a race to see who can bring as many of their pieces into the game as they can in the opening stages. And of course, number three, we must practice good king safety. And one rule of thumb I tell all of my students is try to protect your king before you attack. If you wait too long, it can really backfire, as we're going to see in this game today as well. Dr. Carr is playing black, and he plays his pawn to h6. Many of my students ask me, Coach Bryant, my opponents play moves I just don't even understand. How can I defeat these opponents? And I tell them, very simply, you need to follow the opening rules. d4. By placing both of our pawns on d4, I'll draw some arrows here. We are, well, not that arrow. We are taking control of the complete center for ourselves, as well as our bishops are ready to come into the game. Black decides to play pawn to a5, and I think we can all see that while Dr. Carr is a very smart person, even a doctor, he doesn't have a lot of chess know-how and skill. Bishop to d3, White develops a piece off of the back rank to control the center and to prepare for castling later on. Black plays b6. Knight to e2. White develops yet another piece off of the bench into the game, and this also prepares him to castle next turn. Black is still wasting time pushing only pawns. And after we castle, I like to stop and talk about this position in particular. White has safely guarded his king and is now ready for the upcoming battle. But if I draw some circles here, we can see that Black's army is nowhere close to the fight at the moment. Our king is safe, our bishop and knight and rook have all moved into the game. Time for Paul Morphy to start creating some threats. Black starts off with bishop to a6, and Black's idea is very simple. Because his pieces are sort of crammed shoulder to shoulder in the bench, his goal is to get everyone out of the broom closet, as I like to say. In this position, should Paul Morphy accept this trade of bishops? What do you think? No. Trading would help the player that has less space to move around. As we can see, Paul Morphy has plenty of room, and there's no reason to trade, so he just blocks the enemy bishop instead. Black decides time to start bringing in more teammates, which does make sense. The problem is, when he moves his knight to f6, there's nothing to keep his knight safe in the center. Now, Paul Morphy in this position could play a move like, let me draw my arrow here, knight to c3, developing his piece into the game. Oh goodness. Computer's being a little slow today. Alright, here we go. After the move like knight to f6, our job is to punish our opponent whenever possible. And in this position, his knight has nothing defending him in the center. So Paul Morphy does play this powerful move e5, forcing the knight to retreat. I know what you're thinking though. Let me go back to this for a moment here. Why not develop our knight to c3? Why not develop our bishop? Maybe to e3 or to f4. And while these moves are also good moves, they're not as forcing as pawn to e5. So we're going to look at e5. Forcing is knight to move. And I have a funny little bit of trivia for you. What happens if his knight decides not to retreat but to move forward? If you need to, pause your video and find the answer. White to play and punish black for this move. Did you find this move? All of a sudden, the knight is trapped. He has no escape route to safely move. He's simply run out of squares, and he's going to lose the knight. What if the knight moves to h5? Here's another shot for you. White to play and attack that trapped knight. g4. Still trapped. A little bit awkward. Let's return to the game. After pawn to e5, knight h7. So keeping the knight nice and safe. There are a number of good moves for white. Because he is castled right away, he has a lot of good options, where black is sort of running out of options here. In this case, white decides it's time to start gaining more room for my pieces, and he plays pawn to f4. As you can see, a truly dominating center control for Paul Morphy. Morphy wants to eventually push his pawn to f4 and possibly take, and that would also open up our rook and get our pieces working together quite nicely on the open file. Black decides to play bishop e7, and black has finally prepared himself enough to castle. So Paul Morphy decides, before playing f5, let's bring our most powerful piece into the game, knight to g3. I have some arrows on the board here to show. Our queen has the option of coming to f3, which would attack the rook. Can come to g4, which would attack the pawn. And even h5, I'll get rid of that arrow, from where we could attack Freddy, the forbidden f-pawn. The goal is not to move Freddy until after you have castled. Notice how moving Freddy in this position is really strong for white because he already castled. Black plays d5, and all of a sudden black has introduced the first threat of the game. 2 versus 1. 2 attackers on the c4 pawn, and only our bishop is defending. Now, a lot of my students say, well, Coach Bryant, why can't I just defend it? Let's say with a pawn. Or defend it, say, with my knight. And to them, I would like to remind them the strongest way, I want you to remember this, the strongest way of meeting an enemy threat is to ignore it and make a bigger threat. Pause your videos and find how can white create an even bigger threat. Go ahead, pause it. You can do it. Did you find this move? Queen to g4. Ignoring the c4 pawn and threatening to give a fork after the queen takes the free pawn on g7. Black now must make a decision. And he decides to save his pawn. It's probably a good decision. Otherwise, he may have lost a lot more material now. Since he castled right in front of our queen, once again, instead of saving our pawn, how could Paul Morphy create an even bigger threat? Here's another chance for you. Pause your video if you need. It isn't knight f5, because to control a square, you have to stand in it or attack it. And black controls the f5 square, so we would lose our knight. No, instead, Paul Morphy played knight h5, threatening, you guessed it, checkmate in one move. Black now has to be very careful, or else he may lose the game right away. In this position, his bishop is not allowed to defend the pawn because, hey, we control that square. This leaves black with only the option of opening the black gate. He has to push these pawns out of the way. Now, a lot of players don't like to move their pawns in front of the king, and I'm one of the players in that, because pushing pawns in front of your king just creates more weaknesses and holes that you have to cover with your pieces. Let's back up. One of my students asked, Coach Bryant, why not just pawn to g6? Doesn't that do the same thing? If you'd like, this is a very nice checkmate in 3 moves here. White to play and force a checkmate in 3 moves. Some of you advanced players may be able to spot it right away. Pause your videos if you need. I'll give you guys about 5 more seconds and then I'll move on. Alright, so this is a common idea. Giving away a piece to blast the gate open and force checkmate. Check and mate. Very cute move there. So pawn to g6 right now would actually lose the game on the spot. So Dr. Carr pushes the pawn to g5. Now we can see that there are pieces in our way stopping us from checkmating the black king. I'll highlight them here. If only our queen could just jump over all of them and land on g7 with a checkmate. Unfortunately, this is an illegal move, so we're going to have to get a little bit creative. Paul Morphy decides starts the attack by trading off these pieces for his other pieces. Pawn takes on g5, opens the rook, and also threatens to take another pawn. So black is forced to take back. He takes back with his pawn. One thing to mention, if he takes back with a piece, walking into a pin, we can actually put pressure on the pinned piece, as seen on Chess Kid, by attacking the piece even more with our pawn going to h4. A lot of ways for black to go wrong in this game. Alright, let's continue. After we take, black recaptures with his pawn. And once again, our goal is to eliminate the defenders of the enemy king. Takes knight. Ooh! That king is looking more and more open. And I've highlighted with an arrow our idea with white. The whole point is we're going to play knight to f6, check if he captures our bishop, and my rook and my pawn are defending the knight. So there's no way that this will be captured. Now, Dr. Carr was too afraid to accept the bishop, so he quietly moved into the corner. Paul Morphy, with his blindfold on, thinking, plays it anyway. Knight f6. Black has 2 attackers. Yes, there is 2 because the queen also counts. And white has 2 defenders of the knight. Therefore, it is a safe move. He cannot capture that knight. Our pawn or the rook could recapture. In this position, I think the pawn recapture looks stronger. Dr. Carr isn't exactly sure what to do, so he simply grabs the pawn. Now, chess kids, here's your final puzzle of the game. White to play and force a checkmate. Should we bring up the queen, or is there a stronger move? Pause your videos. I'll give you guys about 10 seconds here. Take your time and really look at how to threaten a checkmate. Good luck. I had one of my students suggest queen to h5 in one of my classes. The problem with this move leaves our pawn hanging. This is actually a check. And once our king hides in the corner, black can defend with his queen. So that's a very annoying move. Trading our most powerful queen with his defending queen, maybe not the best way to force a checkmate. So an even stronger move than moving forward is get out of the way. We've already eliminated the black gate that's guarding the king on the H file. So the goal now is very simple. We simply need to bring the queen forward and give a checkmate. This is where Dr. Carr actually gave away his queen simply to try and delay the game a little bit longer. And Morphy was able to eventually win the game after he simply won the free queen. So we're going to stop the game here. One thing to touch on before we move on to your next lesson, I want to just quickly give a summary of the game. Morphy was able to use those 3 opening advantages that we talk about so often but are often forgotten in tournament chess. The first rule is always try to go for better control of the center. Think of the center like a giant hill. It's a lot easier to run down the hill than to try to run up that hill later on. Second thing, definitely develop your pieces. Black's pieces in this game were simply not able to stop us from checkmating because he simply pushed way too many pawns in the opening. And better king safety is key. Castling before you move the f-pawn. I can't emphasize how many games I have lost because I've pushed the f-pawn before I've castled. Don't be like me. Definitely follow the opening rules. When I was younger, I tried to create my own strategies every game. I tried to be as creative as I could. And the reason why I'm teaching is I had to lose so many games. I want to save you from that same fate. With that being said, don't forget to look for forcing moves. It would have been very, I would say, passive. It would not have been very good for Morphy to just try and defend everything. The best way to meet an enemy threat is to ignore it and make a bigger threat. Thank you guys for watching this game of the week. I'm Coach Bryant, and don't forget to keep up with us online. I'm going to be able to see all of your report cards on ChessKids, so keep up the puzzles and be like Morphy, develop all of your pieces in Castle. Thank you guys for watching.